we're going to make a video here on how to restore a console stereo. First thing you got to do is find a console stereo. I traded a bottle of rum to an estate sale manager for this one because usually at the very end of the estate sale nobody wanted it. I don't know what they had it marked at originally. Usually like $100 or something, and then it just drops and drops until the last day, and then they're like, get it out of here. Which is cool for people like us that like them. So this unit's a magnavox. It has tubes in it. Came with some cool stuff, which they usually do. So we'll show you here. Open that up, and you got, of course, your turntable in there, and the tuner faceplate. This model is a 62, and I know that because I looked up some of the amps and stuff like that. The thing with Magnavox, it'll have a model number on the back, and they really don't mean anything. They're really hard to back reference as to what unit it actually is. Seems to be like the better way to figure this stuff out is to look at the old catalogs and say, you know, this one probably has a name. I don't know what it's called exactly. It doesn't matter to me. Some people care, so you know, you could look it up. Anyways, tuners there. Looks pretty nice. Has a little actual tuning, you know, gauge right there in the middle instead of a tuning eye like some of the older, or maybe probably older units, and then maybe some of the upgrade units have a tuning eye. And then it's got a speaker selector, which is cool. It's got external speaker potential. It's got a little mount on the back. Makes that kind of neat. Stereo phono, stereo FM, auxiliary input, which is cool. And I'm going to be setting up a 1/8" jack on this so that the gal who's buying it can plug her phone or her iPad into it. She wants to listen to records. She has some, of course, so we got to get the turntable working. And yeah, so bass and treble on there. Now, we know this unit is tube for one glaring main reason. It does not say Astrosonic on it. Everything Magnavox did that was solid state says Astrosonic. So something to look out for. Flip it over to the other side here. Came with some records, some old 78s and some ink spots, early 33. Some neat stuff. The cool part about this, the coolest part, is what's in here. This is the original sales receipts from the audio-visual place. Some Magnavox certificate of warranty, which is super cool. It's got a golden seal. This was the piece that originally would have sat right on top of the turntable for sale. And we got this cool little golden badge thing here, which is the gold seal model. Must have all been hanging in the furniture store like that. And here's the original operating instructions. Date the instrument was installed was 1963. Shows the serial number, model number. Means nothing to us at this point. Person's name and all that stuff, where it came from. So cool. It's always cool to find that stuff. So that's the first step, finding one. We found a cool one because it's a tube unit, because it's stereo, and it has all kinds of cool swag that came with it. So we don't want to just plug the unit right in to test it. There is potential for it to explode, catch on fire. I don't know. I've heard lots of stories. It's never happened to me, but basically your electrolytic capacitors are dried out. They need to be replaced. And just by simply plugging the unit in and applying full energy to them, there is potential for the capacitors to short circuit, arc, start a fire, etc. Or blow up your output transformers. That's the worst thing I've heard that could happen. If your output transformers are gone, your amplifier won't work, and you might as well throw it away. So don't just plug them right in. You can plug in the record player on its own to test it, but you don't want to just plug the amps directly in. The way to get around this is with a variac. Now this is a variac. They are variable power transformers, so you plug it into the wall, plug your console unit or any sort of tube amp, whatever you want to warm up in up there, and turn it on. Then slowly apply voltage. I usually run it up every 10 minutes. I turn it up another 20 volts or so, and you can watch it respond here on this meter. you'll hear the tubes start to like crinkle a little bit and make some noise. As they're warming up, you'll start to smell the dust cooking off the tubes and everything. You slowly get it up and up and up until you get to the point you'll start to hear sound out of the unit. You need to have the unit turned on when you're doing it, or else it won't do anything. Once you're up at 110 volts with the voltage coming from the wall, or 120 volts, then it should be full power applied to it, and you'll get to mess around with the unit and see how everything was working. Again, it's like 20 volts every 10 minutes or so, and that does it nice and safe. You don't have to do this, like I mentioned before. You can just take the amps and take them straight over to the bench and recap them, put them back together again, and then just apply full power. This is just an option if you're eager to test it out. Just because you test it out with Variac doesn't mean that you should leave it plugged in and run it that way. You still should always, for safety's sake, replace those capacitors before putting things into full use. That's the gist of step one. Find a unit, warm it up slowly to see if everything works. I did that to this, and everything did function. The record player almost did everything it needed to. I think it got stuck maybe slightly in a cycle, which means the grease needs to be cleaned up and replaced. The amplifier came on and actually sounded really nice. We were listening to the radio on it. The radio tuner tuned in really well. So we got lucky with this one. Looks like it was taken care of. So the next step is we're going to take the back off, and we got to figure out what components are inside the unit, and that will allow us to determine what capacitors we're going to need to purchase in order to get this thing all recapped and restored. Okay, so we got the back of the unit open now, and we're going to figure out what amplifiers are in here, or what chassis are in here. That will tell us what capacitors we need to buy. So you open these up and you've got about 50 years worth of dust and stuff. Sometimes there's bugs and rats and things. I don't know. This one was clean. It's inside a nice house, and I think house was kept generally clean, so we're pretty good there. So inside these, you'll tend to find these diagrams here that kind of show how everything's connected together. Unfortunately, what they don't show is they don't show the model numbers of all the individual components. They do show you what you got. It says MPX adapter, it says tuner, and it says amplifier, and it says record changer. So we know we have all of that. Capacitors. That right there is a capacitor. That is a crossover capacitor. We're going to be replacing that as well. There's going to be 2 of those. So usually on these, you're not going to find it in any sort of manual, so I usually just twist that around and determine the value from the side of that. So we need to order 2 of those guys, and then we also need to get any caps, electrolytic capacitors like these for the tuner units. This is an MPX, which is like an FM tuner stereo, something to do with tuning in early stereo stuff, if I'm not mistaken. And this is that's the main tuner chassis up there. I've found not much of a point in messing with all the capacitors in a tuner. If you do that, you have to realign the tuner. I have the equipment to do that. You're going to need a frequency generator and a vacuum tube voltmeter. It's kind of a pain. It's a tedious process, takes a long time. You're plugging all kinds of stuff in together on a workbench. It's a little bit stressful, and it's easy to avoid by simply not replacing the capacitors in the tuner. They don't tend to have a high load on them, so I mean, besides the electrolytics on these chassis, we're going to be leaving these chassis alone. So electrolytic capacitors are these big cans right here, and sometimes there's some maybe hidden underneath the chassis, but the manuals, the SAM's PhotoFacts, will let us know what's in them. So in order to find which SAM's PhotoFact we want to get, we need to get part numbers off of these units. So if you look right here, that right there is amplifier 8802. Up here on the tuner, we've got, let's see, right there, and it's hard to see, there it is, 7909-10-X, that's our tuner, and over here on the MPX unit is a 7002-00. So, what we're going to do is get the PhotoFax manuals, and I actually have them all already. I got them from asking around, asked people on the Facebook forums, hey, does anybody have this specific manual? You know, ask, go on vintagehifi.net. There's a lot already uploaded on there, and there's a lot of people who have large collections, so they have these things. So, if you can see the chassis number here, right there, magnavox chassis, and we had a 7909, so 7909-00. So that would be, this covers the tuner. This right here is an MPX unit, 7002, that's the one we had, and then here's the one that covers the amplifier, 8802. So I like the Sam's PhotoFax for one major reason, and that's this right here. This is a parts list. It's everything we need to order. So you go in, all your electrolytic capacitors are there, your fixed capacitors are here. These are generally Mylar ones, and they need to be replaced as well. We don't tend to touch the ceramic disc capacitors, so it's kind of hard to tell just by looking at it which one might be ceramic and which one might be the Mylar. But you can do it by, elsewhere in these manuals there's going to be drawings, and right there, so you can kind of look at those and say, well, with the drawing, you know, what does that cap look like? Sometimes you can just see it right there on the drawing that there's a disc versus a, you know, right there you can see one. Maybe not, you can't see it, but I can. So you can go through and pick and choose which ones you know you need to order, which ones you don't. You absolutely would want to get the electrolytic capacitors. All right, so here's the two resources, antiqueradio.org/recap.htm. That's the best nice and concise layout of exactly how to recap an amplifier, in my opinion. It explains all the stuff that needs to go, all the stuff that can stay. It explains all the very important rules of thumb as far as what you can replace what with. And then Mouser.com is the other one. Mouser, it's kind of a pain to use the website because they just have a billion things available. But once you get it down, it's the best resource because you can buy everything all at once. So with the rules of thumb, the quick layout is on the electrolytic capacitors. You need to know whether they are polarized or non-polarized. The capacitance can be increased up to double safely. I believe you could actually take that to the moon if you wanted, but you'd just be wasting your money. Same thing with the voltage on electrolytics. On the polymer caps, voltage can be increased up, and then you want to go stick within 20% plus or minus of your original capacitance. While we're in there replacing capacitors, we want to test resistors, pull them off of whatever they're soldered to and test them. If they are 20% out of spec, replace them, and you can replace them with metallized resistors. So that's the quick and dirty, the gist of it. But rather than just use those rules of thumb, read this, antiqueradio.org/recap, and that's the best first step. Best advice I always give everybody who wants to get into this amplifier restoration.